part 2. So if y'all remember the picture I showed, this board with all this nice scribble on it, we're going to eventually get to all of that. But first we have to talk about another basic point in soil. Alright. So on this board, if you see, I've got the cations, which are your positive charge, your acid cations, which again are positive charge, your anions, which are negative charge. I'm explaining some of the stuff about nitrification, and we're talking about nitrogen sources. So we'll get to each one of those in this video one by one. So let's talk about the major cations first. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and ammonium, which is represented as an NH4+. Okay. Now, these all here have positive charges, where your soil, as I told you in one of the previous videos, has a negative charge. That means that with these being a positive charge and the soil being a negative charge, they can pretty much bind together and stay together, to where the anions, which are negative charge, chlorine, nitrate, sulfate, phosphate, they do not attract to the soil. Now, do not confuse phosphate for phosphorus. Phosphate has to be converted down to phosphorus, and it is very immobile in soil. The only time it is mobile is when it's on top of the soil, where it can actually get into a mobile state and wash. And that's why we prefer incorporation of phosphates when we do it, to improve the environment and to also get everything into the soil so that it's available. Your ammonium, NH4+, it has to convert to NO3-, which is nitrate, and guess what happens now that we have this minus here? It will not bind to this negative charged soil, so this is why it's very, very mobile. Nitrate is the version of nitrogen that the plant uses. It will take on ammonium to an extent, but it still has to break it down into this. So this is what we work with. It needs 4 conditions. It has to have nitrification bacteria. It has to have soil temps greater than 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a pH range of 5.5 to 7.5, and sufficient moisture and oxygen to do the breakdown process to do nitrification. Now, if you think, we're talking about our yards right now. Here we are in January of 2019. We've had a bad season. One, we have had plenty of moisture, but a lack of oxygen because the ground has been so saturated. So we cannot nitrify our ammonium to make it into plant usable form, NO3-. All right. The other thing is, what we do have that is plant available leaches and washes down through the soil. If you remember in the video I showed you about the colloid, leaches down through the soil and becomes unavailable to the plant. So the plant is basically right now starving for nitrogen because it's just not there, because the conditions are not there. So just so you understand nitrogen and what's going on with that. Now, if you look, I have these purple stars by these 3 here, these acid cations. Now, sodium is not an acid cation per se, but sodium will affect pH, just like hydrogen and aluminum. What typically happens when your soil is in a high or a low pH situation is calcium has gotten displaced, and an abundance of hydrogen and or aluminum has become prevalent in the soil. This is why we use lime. Lime is full of calcium. Domolytic and calcilytic lime, and calcilytic lime being your highest calcium, and gypsum. Gypsum also contains calcium. So what we are attempting to do when we correct a pH issue is we're attempting to displace the hydrogen and if necessary the aluminum cations with excessive calcium cations to return balance to the soil. Now if you look, and I've got a little bit of a glare here because of my light, but in a perfectly balanced soil we have 68% calcium, 12% magnesium, 5% potassium, 2% sodium, and you can't see behind this glare here, but that's hydrogen, so 10% hydrogen, and then 3% other bases. This is what is considered balanced soil. If we obtain a balanced soil, then we do not have to worry about so much correcting pH issues, because they would correct themselves because we have the proper balance of the major cations in the soil. Alright. Hopefully some of this is starting to come together for you a little bit here and make a little bit of sense when we give you these calculations of how we're coming up with how much, solucal you've got to put down or whatnot and whatever. There is a reason to this madness, this balance here that we are ultimately after, is how we come to that. And a little later I'll explain it, but you can see I've got another line down here. This represents the pounds per 1 unit of CEC. Again, we will talk about that later. Now, back over to here. So the cations, these guys here, need to be in balance. Again, 68% for calcium, 12% for magnesium, 5% for potassium, and 2% for sodium, and hydrogen should be 10% to obtain a perfectly balanced soil. We also have the negative charges. Now remember, with these being negative charges, these anions, they're not going to readily attach to the soil. So these guys are going to be highly mobile. They're chlorine, nitrate or NO3 minus, sulfate, SO4 minus minus, and phosphate, PO4, with a 3 negative charge. Okay? Now, what happens with these guys is these are all actually used by the plant, but remember we keep talking about, and what I want to focus on is this guy right here, nitrate. We keep talking about the soil, the nitrogen being mobile and leaching in the soil. Right here is the reason why. This little negative charge here, he cannot attach here. So he moves down through the soil. This is why when you have heavy rains, nitrogen is the first one to show up in the deficiency in soils and in your plant, because it washes, it leaches down. There are 3 nitrogen sources in fertilizer: NH4 plus, ammonium, NO3 minus, nitrate, and urea. Okay? Urea and ammonium has to be broke down via the nitrification process to become plant usable nitrate. Again, back to these 4 conditions that we described right here. Alright. So if you remember where we were talking about, I did a real short video about soil biology. You're now starting to see where all this is starting to come together. We have the biological components of nitrification bacteria, soil temperatures, pH, moisture, and oxygen to make all that work. We also have to deal with the fact of the cation exchange capacity. We've talked about that before, where the ability to hold these cations and then exchange it into the soil solution, like the previous video we discussed about, to make it available to the plants. All right. Typically, clay particles and or soil humus or organic matter are your main ingredients for your cation exchange capacity. This is why sandy soils have almost little to no cation exchange capacity. Silt's a little bit more because they do have some clay particles in it, but they don't have much. Sand has none. So with sand, you almost have to put organic matter in it to get your cation exchange capacity to hold moisture and to hold nutrients. organic matter can actually be positive or negative charge, and they are slap off the chart. If you remember in the previous video, I talked about it could be as much as 200-300 values in CEC. So this is where compost, humic acid, organic matter, anything that we can put into the soil to increase the humus and the organic matter in it is going to increase our ability to hold these cations, exchange them, and do them back to the plant in the soil solution as needed. And again, the soil solution is the water and the soil inside the little bitty cracks that go all down through the soil, and the ability for that root to absorb and diffuse the nutrients into it. Like I said in the last video, a lot of the nutrients do not come directly off the soil particle, they come off of that soil solution. Okay? So again, here's another step of where we're going to keep building up into this board here. But this is another step we need to understand that I will tell you that this is just a tip of the iceberg that I'm giving you. If you truly want to understand everything I am saying here, I would suggest you Google some of these topics or some of the reference materials I've given you, because it is a very, very in-depth topic, more than I'm going to attempt to overload you with in a video. All I'm trying to do is give you the high-level understanding of what's going on with these cations, these anions, and these acid cations, and how they all affect everything that's going on in your soil when you see that soil test. So, again, know it's going to be a little confusing here. Trust me, it has been confusing for me for a long time. I'm just now getting a good grasp on this stuff. And I've been doing this stuff really since I was about 12 years old. I'm 40 now, if that gives you an idea of how complex this is. So, anyway, the next video we're going to start working on some of this stuff here. You know, we're going to talk about over there, I'm giving some formulas of how to figure out some things. Just going to show you how to do some soil corrections. I'm going to give you some constant variables over here with different stuff of what it does. We're going to talk about why pH is logarithmic and what pH ultimately means. We're going to touch on CEC very heavily and how to do some of these calculations, and we're going to use an example soil test that we're going to do all this from. So, like I said, this is going to be a long journey, guys. Stick with me. Till the next video. Thanks for watching.